The transmission from Earth ended, and for several long moments, the council chamber remained frozen in a silence so profound that the ancient stones of the building seemed to hold their breath. Then chaos erupted, as 47 species tried simultaneously to process what they had just witnessed, and what it meant for their futures and their very existence in a galaxy that had suddenly become far more dangerous than any of them had ever imagined. High Arbiter Vethral shouted for order, while military advisors from a dozen different species demanded immediate action, and diplomatic representatives called for emergency negotiations, and scientists insisted that what they had seen must be some kind of elaborate trick. Emergency military mobilizations were ordered across Council space, with defense fleets scrambling to protect homeworlds and colonial holdings from an attack that everyone assumed was coming at any moment. Diplomatic envoys were hastily assembled and sent toward human space, carrying offers of reinstatement to the Council, proposals for alliance and partnership, and in some cases, what amounted to complete surrender and submission to human authority. Days passed, and then weeks, and then months, and nothing happened at all. Human ships were occasionally spotted now, moving through Council space without any attempt to hide their presence. Sleek vessels that made even the most advanced Council warships look like primitive toys. But they never attacked, and they never threatened, and they never even responded to the frantic communications that Council vessels broadcast in their direction. They simply passed through on their way to somewhere else, to destinations and purposes that the Council could not fathom and could not follow. And then they were gone again. High Arbiter Vethral sent message after message requesting a meeting with Catherine Monroe, and for 3 months he received no response at all. Finally, a brief communication arrived, informing him that the ambassador would meet him at the same neutral station where the expulsion documents had been signed. He arrived at the station alone, as the message had requested, and found Catherine waiting for him in the same conference room where she had accepted humanity's exile just 1 year and 4 months ago. She looked exactly as he remembered her, professional and composed and quietly confident. But there was something different in her eyes now, a depth of knowledge and experience that had not been there before. A young human man stood beside her, introduced as Timothy Walsh, who spent most of the meeting looking bored while studying something on his personal data tablet. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with me," Vethral said as he settled into a chair across the table from the two humans. Catherine nodded politely and waited for him to continue, her posture relaxed and unhurried, as if she had all the time in the world. "Time in the universe. I need to understand why you have not attacked us," Vethral said finally, abandoning all pretense of diplomatic protocol, because the situation had moved far beyond such formalities. Catherine considered the question for a moment before responding, and when she spoke, her voice was thoughtful rather than triumphant. "Do you know what terrified us most about the Council when humanity first joined?" she asked. Vethral shook his head, because he could not imagine anything in the galaxy that could terrify the species he had just seen demonstrate power beyond his comprehension. "Your stagnation," Catherine said simply, "because 47 species and thousands of years of cooperation and partnership, and nothing ever changes." She stood up from her chair and walked to the observation window, where the stars burned cold and distant against the black velvet of space. The same technologies, the same borders, the same political structures and social hierarchies and ways of thinking, generation after generation, century after century, millennium after millennium, she continued. And you built a galactic civilization that could have achieved anything, and then you simply stopped. She turned back to face him, and her expression held no anger or contempt, only a strange kind of sadness. "You achieved comfort and security, and you made that comfort into your grave," she said. "And you became so focused on maintaining what you had built that you forgot how to build anything new." Vethral wanted to argue with her, wanted to defend the council and its long history of cooperation and peace, but the words died in his throat, because he knew that she was right. "We did not resist our expulsion because we did not need to," Catherine continued, "and you gave us exactly what we wanted, without even realizing it." She sat back down across from him, her hands folded on the table between them. "You gave us freedom from your limitations and your restrictions and your endless committees and treaties," she said, "and you gave us motivation to exceed everything we had been before, and you gave us time to do it properly, without interference." Timothy finally looked up from his data tablet, his expression still bored, but his words carrying enormous weight. "The colony ship Horizon departed for the Andromeda Galaxy last week," he said casually, "and it carried a crew of 3 million people who will establish the first human settlement outside the Milky Way." Vethral's 4 eyes blinked rapidly as he struggled to process this information. "The travel time will be approximately 11 days, Timothy added, "and by the end of this year, we will have a permanent presence in another galaxy entirely." The High Arbiter felt something he had never experienced in his centuries of life, a deep and existential smallness that made him feel like an insect, looking up at mountains that stretched beyond sight. "What do you want from us?" he asked, and his voice carried a desperation that he no longer had the pride to hide. Catherine looked at him with an expression that might have been pity, or might have been something else entirely. "Nothing," she said, "and that is what has frightened you from the very beginning, because when a species needs something from you, you can negotiate and bargain and find ways to control the relationship." She stood up again, preparing to leave, and Timothy tucked his tablet under his arm and followed. "But we do not need your resources, because we can create anything we require from raw energy," she said, "and we do not need your technology, because ours is already far beyond anything you possess, and we do not need your approval or your friendship or your alliance." She paused at the door and looked back at him one final time. "We do not need you at all," she said, "and I know that is hard to accept, but perhaps it will give you the motivation to become something more than you are now." The door slid open, and she stepped through it. "The galaxy is yours, High Arbiter," she said over her shoulder, "and you should keep it and protect it and perhaps even improve it. But please understand that we have moved on to other things." The door closed behind her, and Vethral sat alone in the conference room for a very long time, staring at the stars through the observation window and wondering what the future held for his people and all the other species of the Council. In the months and years that followed, the Council would debate endlessly about what had happened and what they should do about it, but no consensus ever emerged because the truth was simply too difficult to accept. Human ships continued to pass through Council space occasionally, on their way to destinations that no one else could reach, and sometimes they would stop to trade or exchange information, treating the Council species with a polite friendliness that somehow felt more insulting than contempt would have been. The 47-member species watched as humanity spread across the Milky Way and then beyond it, establishing colonies in Andromeda and then in galaxies even more distant, building a civilization that spanned distances that the Council could barely comprehend. And through it all, the question that haunted every Council leader and every Council citizen was always the same. What had they unleashed when they pushed humanity away, and was it too late to matter? The humans never answered that question directly, because they were too busy building something magnificent and wonderful and terrifying, reaching for horizons that no other species had ever dreamed of. They had been expelled from the Council because they were considered too ambitious and too aggressive and too unwilling to accept limitations. To contain them, the galaxy had set them free to become something that would change the universe forever. Perhaps that was the most terrifying thing of all, because it meant that the Council's greatest fear had been justified from the very beginning. Humanity really was different from every other species in the galaxy, And now everyone would have to live with the consequences of that difference for the rest of eternity. On the 1-year anniversary of Earth's expulsion from the Galactic Council, every screen and display and communication device in the Great Council chamber suddenly flickered and went dark for exactly 3 seconds before coming back to life with an image that made every alien heart freeze with terror. The face of Ambassador Catherine Monroe filled the holographic center stage where the High Arbiter usually stood to deliver judgments. But she was no longer wearing the formal diplomatic attire that the Council remembered from her last appearance in this chamber. Instead, she wore a dark uniform that none of them had ever seen before, with silver insignia on her collar that marked her as something far more than a simple ambassador. And her expression carried a confidence that bordered on something the translator program struggled to define. "Esteemed members of the Interstellar Council of Aligned Worlds," she began, her voice perfectly calm and measured as it echoed through the chamber. "Exactly 1 year ago today, you voted to expel humanity from your organization." High Arbiter Vethral frantically gestured to his technical staff, demanding that they trace the source of the transmission and shut it down. But they shook their heads helplessly because they had never seen technology capable of hijacking Council systems so completely. Catherine continued speaking as if she could see the panic spreading through the assembly, and perhaps she could. "You cited our ambition as a threat to galactic stability," she said, "and you accused us of expanding too quickly and developing weapons that violated your precious treaties, and you believed that expelling us would somehow contain the danger that we represented." She paused for a moment, and something that might have been amusement flickered across her features before disappearing behind her professional mask. "You were absolutely right to fear those things," she said. "We're catastrophically wrong to believe that expulsion would stop them." The transmission shifted away from her face to show images that made the assembled counselors gasp and cry out in shock and disbelief. Human ships unlike anything in Council databases filled the screen, their designs sleek and angular, and somehow wrong in ways that made the alien viewers' minds itch with a recognition they could not quite grasp. These vessels did not look like they had been built by the same species that had joined the Council just 18 years ago, because they seemed to belong to a civilization that was centuries ahead of anything the galaxy had ever seen. The images changed again to show weapons platforms that dwarfed the largest Council battle stations. Massive constructs bristling with technology that the Council's best scientists would have declared impossible just a few years ago. Then came footage of ground forces in armor that seemed to drink in the light around them. Soldiers moving with a speed and precision that made the Council's elite troops look like children playing at war. "The past 12 months, he said, "you have watched our borders and seen nothing, and you have sent your spies and your probes and your reconnaissance vessels, and every single one has disappeared without a trace." He pulled up a holographic display of his own, showing a web of blue dots that covered every major star system controlled by Council species. "The reason you saw nothing at our borders is because we were not at our borders," he continued, "but instead we were everywhere else, placing surveillance stations in your home systems, and your military installations, and your most secret facilities, watching and listening, and learning everything there is to know about your civilizations." The chamber erupted into chaos as counselors demanded explanations and accused each other of failing to detect the intrusion, and called for immediate military action against the human threat. But Catherine raised her hand, and somehow the gesture commanded enough attention to act. "Quiet the assembly. We did not watch you because we planned to attack," she clarified, "but because we needed to understand whether you posed any genuine threat to humanity, or whether you were simply an inconvenience that could be ignored." She paused, and the silence that followed felt heavier than the vacuum of space. "After 12 months of careful observation and analysis," she said, "we have reached our conclusion." Gregory Santos took over again, his voice carrying no trace of boasting or aggression. just the simple statement of facts that could not be disputed. Your technology is approximately 600 years behind ours, he reported, and your combined military forces could not threaten a single human colony ship. And your economic systems are built on resources that we can now manufacture from raw energy, using processes that your scientists have not even begun to theorize. Catherine stepped forward again, and the pity in her eyes was genuine, which made it the most terrifying thing the Council had ever witnessed. You expelled us because you believed you were containing a dangerous species, she said, and you thought that cutting us off from your trade networks and your hyperspace lanes would cripple our ability to expand. Her smile widened, and it held no malice, only the quiet satisfaction of someone who had won a game that the other players did not even know was being played. What you actually did was free us from the restrictions that were holding us back, she continued, because as long as we were members of your council, we had to pretend to play by your rules and limit ourselves to technologies that did not threaten your sense of security. She spread her hands wide, as if offering them a gift they had never asked for. Now we have no such limitations, and we have used the past year to become something that you cannot compete with, something that you cannot threaten, that you cannot even properly understand. High Arbiter Vethral finally found his voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper that the chamber's systems amplified for all to hear. What do you want from us? He asked, and for the first time in his centuries of service to the Council, he sounded like a frightened child asking a monster for mercy. Catherine's expression softened, and for a moment she almost looked sad. That is the question that has driven your fear for the past 12 months, she replied, and it is the question that will haunt you for years to come, because the answer is so simple that you will not be able to accept it. She looked directly into the camera, and every being in the chamber felt as if she was speaking to them personally. We want nothing from you, she said, nothing at all, because everything you have, we can make for ourselves, and everything you know, we have already surpassed, and everything you are, have already moved beyond. The transmission shifted one final time to show a star map that extended far beyond the boundaries of the Milky Way galaxy, reaching out to touch the distant spirals of Andromeda and beyond. The galaxy is yours, Catherine said as her image faded from the screens, and we wish you well with it, but please understand that we have many other galaxies to explore, and you are no longer relevant to our plans. The screens went dark, and the council chamber fell into a silence so complete that the assembled beings could hear their own hearts beating with fear. 6 months after the expulsion, the Galactic Council had descended into a state of paranoia that threatened to tear apart the alliance that had stood for thousands of years. Intelligence Chief Thexolin of the Sindari stood before a closed session of the Council's most senior leaders, his scarred face illuminated by the glow of classified documents that floated in the air around him. I must be completely honest with you all, he began, his voice heavy with a weariness that came from too many sleepless nights spent trying to solve an impossible puzzle. Because we have absolutely no idea what the humans are doing. High Arbiter Vethral leaned forward in his seat, his 4 purple eyes fixed on the intelligence chief with an intensity that demanded answers. Surely your operatives have gathered some information by now, he said, because the Sindari Intelligence Service is supposed to be the best in the galaxy. Thexolin shook his head slowly, and for the first time in his long career, he looked genuinely afraid. We have lost over 100 reconnaissance assets in the past 6 months, he reported, and not a single one has returned or transmitted any useful data before disappearing. And I have never seen anything like this in all my years of service. Counselor Miratex of the Valoran Unity spoke up from her platform, her silver skin flickering with the pale blue that indicated deep anxiety among her people. Perhaps they are simply destroying everything that enters their space, she suggested, because that would explain the disappearances without requiring any mysterious new technology. If they were destroying our assets, we would detect the energy signatures, Thexolin replied. But there is nothing at all. No weapons fire, no debris fields, no radiation traces, just complete and total silence that swallows everything we send. The military advisor for the Pale Consortium, a massive crystalline being named Vorath, whose body resonated with each word he spoke, stepped forward with a proposal that had been brewing among the more aggressive council members. "We should strike now," he declared, his voice like the grinding of stones in an avalanche. "Because every day we wait gives them more time to prepare whatever they are planning, and a preemptive assault could end this threat before it becomes unmanageable." Vethral turned to face the crystalline warrior with an expression of barely contained frustration. "Strike at what exactly?" he demanded. "Because we cannot even find their military assets, and we do not know where their ships are stationed, and we have no idea what defenses they have developed in the past 6 months. Then we attack their colonies," Vorath replied without hesitation, "because we know where those are located, and civilian targets will force them to respond and reveal their capabilities." Suggestion: because attacking civilian populations was considered a war crime under Council law, even when dealing with expelled species. Ambassador Korath of the Pale Consortium flickered through several shades of distressed purple before speaking up against his own military advisor. "We cannot simply attack innocent civilians," he protested, "because that would make us no better than the aggressive species we expelled in the first place, and it would undermine everything the Council is supposed to stand for." Vethral raised a hand to silence the brewing argument, and his voice carried the weight of authority when he spoke. "The real problem is not what the humans might be doing," he said slowly, "but what they are not doing, because their complete lack of response is more terrifying than any military action they could have taken." He stood up from his seat and walked to the center of the chamber, where a holographic display showed the borders of human space surrounded by Council territory. "We expelled them because they were becoming too powerful," he continued, "and because they refused to limit their military expansion or obey our treaties, and we thought that cutting them off from the rest of the galaxy would contain their ambitions." His 4 eyes swept across the assembled leaders, and they saw something in his gaze that they had never seen before: genuine fear. "But all we have done is give them a reason to use that power against us," he said, "and we have removed all oversight, and all restrictions, and all attempts at peaceful negotiation. And now we sit here in the dark, wondering what they are building out there, beyond our sight." On the human colony world of New Virginia, life appeared to continue exactly as it had before the expulsion, with no visible signs of the military preparations that were taking place beneath the surface. Children walked to school in the morning sunshine, their vehicles through fields of genetically modified crops that grew twice as fast as anything on Earth, and the local news programs discussed weather patterns and sports results. Planetary Governor Linda Marsh gave a televised interview about agricultural innovations, her cheerful demeanor and warm smile making her seem like the most harmless person in the galaxy. "We are simply focusing on improving life for our citizens," she told the interviewer, "and we have no interest in galactic politics or military adventures, because all we want is to live in peace and grow our little community." But 300 meters beneath the governor's mansion, in a facility that appeared on no official map, and was powered by an energy source that Council scientists would have declared impossible, a very different kind of work was taking place. Dr. Michelle Torres stood before a weapon that could fit in the palm of her hand, but contained enough destructive power to crack a planet in half, and she ran through the final diagnostic tests with the calm efficiency of someone who had grown accustomed to working with apocalyptic technology. "The graviton destabilizer is ready for mass production," she reported to Director Nathan Grant through a secure communication channel, "and we can begin equipping our fleet with these weapons within the next 30 days. Nathan nodded from his office back on Earth, where a dozen screens showed him real-time feeds from every corner of the galaxy, Excellent work, Michelle, he said. And what about the personal shield generators for our ground forces? Also ready, she replied, and our soldiers will be completely invulnerable to any weapon the Council currently possesses, because their energy beams and projectiles will simply pass through our shields without causing any harm. Intelligence Chief Patricia Dunn entered Nathan's office with a tablet containing the latest intercepts from the Council. Communication networks. They are arguing among themselves about whether to attack our colonies, she reported, and some of them want to strike civilian targets to force us to respond. Nathan considered this information for a moment, his expression thoughtful rather than concerned. Let them argue, he decided, because their indecision serves our purposes perfectly, and every day they spend debating gives us more time to prepare. He pulled up a star map that showed not just the Milky Way galaxy, but the neighboring galaxies as well, including the vast spiral of Andromeda that hung like a jewel in the cosmic void. Besides, he added with a small smile, by the time they work up the courage to do anything, we will be ready to show them just how futile their efforts really are. Patricia studied her boss with a mixture of admiration and slight concern, because the man who had once been a simple military strategist had become something far more ambitious. Over the past year. You are enjoying this, aren't you? She asked. Nathan turned to face her with an expression that was both honest and slightly unsettling. I am enjoying the knowledge that humanity will never be at the mercy of alien bureaucrats again, he replied. And I am enjoying the fact that we will soon have the power to shape the future of not just one galaxy, but many. He returned his attention to the screens, where Council ships continued their futile patrols along borders that had become completely meaningless. The galaxy belongs to whoever has the strength and the will to claim it, he said quietly. And very soon, everyone will understand that humanity possesses both in abundance. 3 months had passed since Earth's expulsion from the Galactic Council. And in that time, the Great Alliance of 47 species had grown increasingly nervous about the complete silence that emanated from human space like a dark cloud that refused to dissipate. Every communication channel that had once connected Earth to the rest of the galaxy had gone completely dark, and the 17 human colony worlds scattered across the spiral arm had stopped responding to all attempts at contact. Counselor Miratex of the Veleron Unity had called an emergency session of the Council's Security Committee, and now she stood before her fellow representatives with data projections hovering in the air around her silver form. They have done exactly what they said they would do, she reported, her voice carrying notes of frustration and confusion in equal measure. And I cannot understand why this disturbs me so greatly. The gathered counselors murmured among themselves. As they studied the projections, which showed empty trade routes and abandoned diplomatic stations and communication arrays that transmitted nothing but static. Every human ambassador has returned to Earth, Miratex continued, and every trade representative and cultural liaison and scientific exchange student has gone home with them, leaving behind nothing but clean facilities and polite farewell notes. High Arbiter Vethral stroked his chin with one of his 4 hands, a gesture that indicated deep thought among his people, and his purple eyes narrowed as he studied the data before him. This is precisely what we asked them to do, he said slowly. So why does it feel so wrong? Ambassador Koreth of the Pale Consortium flickered through several shades of uneasy orange before he spoke up from his floating platform. Because species do not simply accept exile, he said, his voice carrying the weight of thousands of years of diplomatic experience. Especially not a species like humanity, which fought its way to the stars through blood and fire and sheer stubborn determination to survive against all odds. The military advisor for the Sindari Collective, a scarred veteran named Thexalon, who had lost an arm fighting human forces during a border dispute years ago, stepped forward with his own report. We have sent 47 separate reconnaissance missions into human space over the past 90 days, he announced, his remaining hand gripping a data tablet tightly, and every single one of them has vanished without a trace. The chamber fell silent at this news, because the Sindari were known throughout the galaxy for their stealth technology and their skilled intelligence operatives. "What do you mean by vanished?" Vethral demanded, his 4 eyes blinking rapidly with alarm. "Exactly what I said, High Arbiter," Thexelon replied grimly, "because our probes did not report being detected or destroyed. And our spy vessels did not send distress signals or emergency data bursts before going offline. And our drone swarms simply stopped transmitting the moment they crossed the border into human territory." "Perhaps they have developed some new form of jamming technology," suggested one of the younger counselors from a species that had only recently joined the Alliance. Thexelon shook his head slowly, his scarred face twisting into an expression of grudging respect mixed with deep concern. "If they were jamming our signals, we would detect the interference patterns," he explained. "But there is nothing at all, only silence so complete that it feels unnatural, as if our vessels simply ceased to exist the moment they entered human space." On Earth, far below the surface, in a bunker complex hidden beneath the Rocky Mountains, Director Nathan Grant reviewed the latest progress reports with his senior staff in a conference room that officially did not exist. Walls were lined with screens, displaying information that would have made any council scientist weep with confusion and fear, showing schematics and data that violated everything the galaxy believed to be possible. Dr. Christopher Vance, the head of theoretical physics for Project Quiet Thunder, projected a holographic image of a sleek starship that looked nothing like anything the Council had ever seen. "The full drive prototypes are performing beyond our most optimistic expectations," he reported, with barely contained excitement. "And we can now move a Dreadnought-class vessel to any point in the galaxy in approximately 4 seconds flat." Nathan leaned forward in his chair with interest, because this was far better than the projections they had made just 6 months ago. "And the Council's fastest ships?" he asked. "They take about 6 weeks to cross the same distance using their hyperspace technology," Christopher replied with a small smile, "which means we have achieved a speed advantage of roughly 700,000 to 1. Intelligence Chief Patricia Dunn pulled up another display showing a complex web of nodes scattered across a map of the galaxy, each one blinking with a soft blue light. "Our surveillance network is also fully operational now," she announced, "and we have placed undetectable monitoring stations in the home system of every single council member species." Nathan studied the map with satisfaction, noting how the blue dots covered every major power center in the known galaxy. "How long have we been listening?" he asked. 2 years and 3 months, Patricia replied, "and we have recorded every military communication, every diplomatic exchange, every scientific discussion, and every secret plot that any council species has engaged in during that time." Fleet Admiral Gregory Santos, a quiet man with gray hair and the calm demeanor of someone who had seen many battles. "Report to the briefing. The automated shipyards on our 12 hidden stations are now running at full capacity," he said, "and we are producing a new warship every 18 hours around the clock." "Current fleet strength?" Nathan asked. 1,200 combat-ready vessels of various classes, with another 2,800 in various stages of construction, Gregory replied. "And at our current production rate, we will have a fleet of 4,000 ships within 8 months. Nathan nodded slowly as he absorbed all of this information, running the numbers in his head and comparing them to the intelligence reports about Council military strength. "And they have no idea that any of this is happening," he said quietly, more to himself than to anyone else in the room. "None whatsoever," Patricia confirmed, "because as far as they can tell, we are sitting quietly in our little corner of the galaxy, licking our wounds and accepting our punishment like good little outcasts." The other staff members in the room exchanged glances that mixed professional pride with something darker and more determined. Dr. Michelle Torres, the lead weapons designer who had spent the last decade developing technologies that would give humanity an insurmountable advantage, spoke up from her seat at the end of the table. Director Grant, I should mention that we completed the final tests on the stellar compression device last week, she said casually, as if discussing the weather, rather than a weapon capable of collapsing a star. Nathan raised an eyebrow at this news, because even among the many terrifying projects that fell under his authority, the stellar compression device held a special place. And the results? He asked. It works perfectly, Michelle replied, and we can now create a contained singularity from any star in the galaxy within approximately 4 minutes, which would obviously destroy any planets or stations in that system. The room fell silent for a moment as everyone contemplated the implications of what she had just said. We will keep that one in reserve, Nathan decided, because I would rather win this game without having to destroy any solar systems. But it is good to know that we have the option if things go badly. He stood up from his chair and walked to the main display, where a real-time feed showed council ships patrolling the borders of human space, completely unaware of the invisible eyes watching them. Continue the silence, he ordered his staff, and let them wonder and worry and imagine the worst possible scenarios, because their fear will do more damage to them than any weapon we could deploy. And somewhere in the depths of space, a council probe crossed into human territory and simply vanished, adding another mystery to the growing list of things that kept the alien leaders awake at night. The great chamber of the Galactic Council stood silent as the final words echoed through the massive hall, and every alien eye turned toward the small human delegation standing at the center podium, waiting for the explosion of anger that was surely about to come. High Arbiter Vethral of the Sindari Collective had just finished reading the verdict that would change everything, his 4 purple eyes scanning the document one final time before he set it down on the ancient stone table that had witnessed 1,000 such judgments over the centuries. Earth and all its territories were hereby expelled from the Interstellar Council of Aligned Worlds, effective immediately, with no possibility of appeal for a period of no less than 50 standard years. The charges were serious and numerous, ranging from unauthorized colonization of 3 star systems that had been marked as protected wildlife reserves, to the continued development of weapons technology that violated at least 17 different treaties that humanity had signed when they first joined the Council just 17 years ago. Ambassador Catherine Monroe stood perfectly still at the human podium, her hands clasped behind her back, in a pose that revealed nothing of what she might be feeling inside. And beside her stood Admiral Daniel Cortez and Secretary of Interstellar Affairs Laura Patterson, both equally composed and quiet. The 47-member species of the Council watched with growing anticipation, because they all knew what was supposed to happen next, what had always happened in the long history of the Council whenever a species faced expulsion from the Great Alliance. There would be shouting and demands for reconsideration, threats of economic warfare and military action, perhaps even the dramatic walkout that the Crethani had performed 2 centuries earlier when they faced similar sanctions, a theatrical display that had become legendary among diplomatic circles. The Veleron delegation leaned forward in their seats, their silver skin shimmering with barely contained excitement at the spectacle that was about to unfold, because humans were known throughout the galaxy for their temper and their refusal to accept defeat. But Catherine simply nodded once, her expression as calm as a still pond on a windless day, and when she spoke, her voice carried clearly through the chamber, without a single tremor of emotion. "We understand," she said, "and we will begin withdrawal procedures immediately, according to the protocols outlined in Section 47 of the Council Charter." High Arbiter Vethral blinked all 4 of his eyes in rapid succession, a gesture that among his people indicated extreme confusion, and he leaned forward across the judgment table as if he had not heard correctly. "You accept this ruling without protest?" he asked, his translator struggling to convey the disbelief in his voice. The chamber erupted into whispers and murmurs that spread like wildfire through the assembled delegations, with representatives turning to one another in confusion and concern, because this was not how things were supposed to go at all. The Sundari delegation huddled together in frantic conversation, their long fingers dancing in the complex sign language they used for private communication. And similar scenes played out across every section of the Great Chamber. Counselor Miratex of the Valoran Unity rose from her seat, her musical voice cutting through the noise with a question that everyone wanted answered. Ambassador Monroe, surely you understand the gravity of what has just occurred here today, and the implications this will have for your species and all of your colonial holdings throughout the galaxy. Catherine turned to face the Valoran counselor with a polite smile that did not reach her eyes, and she spoke with the same calm tone that was beginning to unnerve everyone who heard it. We understand perfectly, Counselor, and we appreciate the Council's patience in allowing us the opportunity to present our defense before the vote was taken, even if that defense was ultimately unsuccessful. But you will lose access to the trade networks, Miratex continued, her confusion evident in the way her silver skin flickered between shades. And your ships will no longer be permitted to use Council hyperspace lanes, and your colonies will be cut off from the resources they need to survive. We are aware of all these consequences. Admiral Daniel Cortez shifted slightly at Catherine's side, his military uniform crisp and perfect despite the tension that filled the room. But his face remained as unreadable as hers, a mask of professional composure that revealed nothing. Ambassador Korath of the Pale Consortium, a being made of living light that shifted colors with his emotions, flickered an anxious yellow. As he spoke up from his delegation's platform, "This is most unusual behavior for your species, Ambassador Monroe, and I must confess that it concerns me greatly, because in all my years of diplomatic service, I have never seen a species accept expulsion so gracefully." "Perhaps we have simply matured as a civilization," Catherine replied, with a slight shrug of her shoulders. "Or perhaps we recognize when a fight is not worth having." The council members exchanged glances that communicated their shared unease, because nothing about this situation felt right, and the humans were behaving in ways that contradicted everything the galaxy knew about their aggressive and competitive nature. High Arbiter Vethral cleared his throat, a sound like stones grinding together, and he spoke with authority that demanded silence from the assembly. "Very well, Ambassador Monroe. The Council accepts Earth's compliance with this ruling, and you have 30 standard days to complete your withdrawal from all Council space and terminate all ongoing cooperative programs." "We will have everything completed within 15 days, Catherine said, and she gathered her delegation with a simple gesture before turning toward the exit. "And we thank the Council for the 17 years of membership that we were granted." The great doors of the chamber swung open to allow the human delegation to pass, and every eye in the room watched them leave with a growing sense of dread that none of them could quite explain. On the transport shuttle back to Earth's embassy station, the three humans sat in silence for several long minutes as the stars streamed past the windows, until Admiral Cortez finally allowed himself to relax his rigid posture. "They're going to figure it out eventually," he said quietly, his voice carrying a hint of dark amusement that he had been suppressing throughout the entire proceedings. Earpiece, and allowed a genuine smile to spread across her face for the first time since they had arrived at the council chamber that morning. "By the time they figure out what we're really doing," she said, leaning back in her seat with the satisfied air of someone who had just won a game that no one else knew was being played, "it won't matter at all." She turned to Laura Patterson, who was already pulling up secure communication channels on her personal tablet with practiced efficiency. "Send an encrypted message to Director Nathan Grant back on Earth," Catherine instructed, her smile growing wider with each passing moment. and tell him that Project Quiet Thunder is now officially active, and that the Council has given us exactly what we needed." Laura nodded and began typing rapidly, her fingers dancing across the screen as the shuttle carried them away from the massive space station and toward the uncertain future that awaited them all. The back of her mind, Catherine allowed herself to feel a moment of genuine pity for the Council and all its member species, because they had no idea what they had just unleashed upon the galaxy. They had tried to contain humanity by pushing them away, but all they had really done was set them free.